Bottom line, Mr. Mulva, is you have no sense of apology or anything about the level of profits that your company is making now?
Well, with respect to our profits, as I said earlier, $3.3 billion is a very large number. On the other hand, what we are doing and have been doing for quite a number of years, and we feel certainly our obligation as an energy company is to provide the energy at affordable, reasonable prices with certainty to our consumers. And we feel that we have done that, and it's our obligation to continue doing that in the future. We are finding oil and gas and developing it around the world and making it available to all of our consumers, and certainly into the United States, requires substantial investments. And we do need the profits so as to redeploy those profits into making sure that we have the energy consumers need with certainty and at a reasonable and affordable price.
What do you think about the $400 million severance package paid to Exxon, former Exxon Chief Executive Lee Raymond?
Well, it's really not appropriate for myself to comment on executive compensation that may be made in one company or another. Certainly in my own case, I'm very well compensated. I also would say that compensation in our industry generally is always tied to performance. So if the companies perform well, you would expect compensation would move accordingly. I also certainly recognize that executive compensation, not only in our company, our industry, but all industry, is a very sensitive subject. We need to make sure, and we fully support Securities Exchange Commission, that with respect to CEO executive compensation, full transparency. We recognize the boards of directors, the shareholders, and activist groups who have an interest in all of this, to make sure that I think you will find over time that executive compensation changes will be made to make sure that it's done in an appropriate way and tied in line with performance of companies.
The Republican Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, said the Raymond thing was unconscionable in his opinion. Do you agree with that?
Well, as I said earlier, it's difficult for me to comment with respect to other companies' compensation. As I said earlier, the most important aspect of it is to make sure that executive compensation is tied to performance, and I think companies do that. We also know that this is a very sensitive subject with a great deal of attention by consumers, politicians, and the public at large. And I can assure you that boards of directors, shareholders, and everyone will be certainly watching, working on this, and I think you will see changes as we go through time.
Again, you're comfortable with your situation. I checked the thing. You're for 2005, you were paid $13 million. There also, was it $190 million that are stock options that you can exercise if and when you leave the company? Am I right about that?
I believe that's correct, but that is really tied over time, and that's something that is really determined over time as a result of the performance of the company. That may or may not happen.
Yeah, but bottom line is, again, you're comfortable with this. This is
well, certainly, absolutely, without doubt. I'm certainly compensated very, very well. I recognize that, but I also recognize the obligation that we have as individuals and as executives in a company that we have to make sure that compensation completely transparent, that's tied in line with the performance of the company, and that it's certainly the oversight in all of this is really handled by the board of directors, and certainly shareholders, public at large, and activists will certainly weigh more and more on executive compensation. I believe personally that you will see changes as we go through time.
Congress, as you know, Mr. Mulva, is desperately trying to find something to do about rising gas prices. Do you have any suggestions for them?
Well, first of all, things that could be done with respect to that have been done in the past, like putting a floor price on windfall profits tax, any kind of increased fiscal take we've demonstrated in the past really doesn't work. Because when you put those kind of measures in place, what happens is you lower the price, it increases demand, it increases our reliance on imports of energy, it increases demand, and it takes away from conservation. As you increase the fiscal take on the companies, there's less cash that's available that we can reinvest so as to grow supply and increase capability and capacity in our refineries. So when we look at what can government do, certainly not those things, but the things that the government can do is give us more access access to lands so that we can explore and we can produce. I think another thing that's very important is that we need to get away from boutique fuels. In the United States today, we have about 100 different types of fuels and different types and seasons of the year. We need standardization.
These are blends of gasoline,
yes, and
right?
what we need is to have standardization of fuels, maybe 5 or 6 across the country. That will lead to standardization, lower cost, more certainty, availability of product, and I believe it will have a modest impact with respect to the price of gasoline. I also think another thing that we need to do is we need to improve approval process. The approval process by which we make investment to add pipelines, add capacity to our refineries, build new refineries, and we need to have an accelerated approval process so that we can import gas in the form of LNG to our country. And the last thing that I think that we really need to do is conservation. Let me explain what I mean by conservation. It's a more efficient use of energy. When I talk about more efficient use of energy, all of us are in this. It applies to companies like ourselves, manufacturers. It certainly applies to the transportation sector as well as to the residential community. On the transportation sector, we need to improve our efficiency and utilization of fuels. So one of the things that we can do to help with respect to the price of gasoline or diesel, price of gasoline at the pump, we need to certainly add supply by our investment, import gasoline. Our imports of gasoline from Europe are at a record level at this point in time. But we also need to not only work on supply, we need to work very hard on reducing demand. And that means more efficient use of energy.
And I mean car mileage restrictions and that sort of thing? You support that?
Absolutely. We need to have transportation with respect to our automobiles in a way that we are more efficiently utilizing every gallon of gasoline or every gallon of diesel. That means that mileage requirements are going to have to be more efficient. However that is done, I think competitively that's coming one way or another in terms of the response by the automobile industry to see to it that we have vehicles that are not only safe, environmentally friendly, but they have far better mileage. We need, as I said, we need to work on adding supply, and we need to work on more efficient use of energy to constrain our increase in our growth and demand.
All right. Mr. Mobile, thank you very much.
Pleased to be with you.